Right now, we are privileged to have one of the most extraordinary Black women scholars in our seat at the ASALH Luncheon, Dr. Ida Jones.
Thank you, Mr. House and the podtvnetwork.com group. It's a pleasure to be with you all. Happy Black History Month.
Happy Black History Month. So, Dr. Jones, tell us a little about yourself.
I am here with the Morgan State University table that was purchased for us, and we are happy to be here. Morgan just turned 150 years old in 2017, and I am the first university archivist the university has had in its 150 years of history.
Wow. So, how important is it for African Americans to support historically Black colleges and universities?
It is extremely important. Although we have opportunities by law and by clearly choice of what we do in terms of funding, the HBCU campus was created exclusively for us under dire straits after the Civil War, most of us, some pre-Civil War also, by churches and land grant. But I think it's important for us to support our institutions so that we can actually affirm ourselves without having to give credence to being. So in being a space of self-affirmation, not in terms of demeaning everybody else, but just a self-affirming space is very important for all of us to have.
That basically we're our own body. We're not an appendage. We're our own body, and we have our own institutions, culture, and identity.
Exactly.
So, Dr. Jones, tell the listeners something about your research, because you do a lot of phenomenal research.
Mr. House, you're too flattering, and I thank you so much. It's very important that we also look at bottom-up history. We always look at top-down, so we have the names of, say, a Martin Luther King or a Malcolm X and Rosa Parks. Those names are very important. Their sacrifices and contributions are extremely important. But there are individuals such as William Henry Jernigan or Helen Roberts or other people who are much more smaller, but were also equally important. We just did a presentation on Helen Roberts. She was the first cook hired at Morgan State University in 1932, and her work was very instrumental in shaping the campus dining experience. Because Morgan is located in what is now Baltimore City's far northeast corner, prior to that it was part of Baltimore County. And that space was a highly entrenched white neighborhood that was very openly hostile to having, quote, the Negro scourge in their area.
Wow.
So there were efforts, both visible and invisible, to take Morgan out of the state of Maryland by hook or crook. So the campus became a very insular place in which African Americans from all parts of Maryland, as well as the greater part of the eastern seaboard, could come to learn a liberal arts education and come to experience a sense of self-affirmation. And the dining experience is very much a part of that. She was born in 1877. She dies in 1982, but during the course of her 50-plus years at Morgan, she served the football team faithfully, making sure they had food to travel and eat on the Jim Crow buses that they had to travel in the areas they had to travel. So football games became very much a homecoming event at all times, and the away games were also where she took care of, quote, her boys, making sure they could have food and sustenance to be able to play and be athletic.
Wow. Community, culture, dedication, integrity. You've named so many values that I believe we don't see that much as a community anymore. So it shows why the narratives are so important and why we must reclaim not only our history, but who we are.
That's a great point, and I think when you actually celebrate what I would call, not pedestrian, but I guess second lights, so you have great lights and you have second lights, but the second light you find you have members in your own family who are those second lights. So sometimes you don't have to look far to see greatness. You can look at your mother or your father, your grandfather, an elder sibling or cousin, and be able to celebrate their surviving in, quote, the belly of the beast, as Marcus Garvey would say, in the cauldron of America. Because we were not brought here to be part of the Republic. We were brought here for a purpose of servitude. And when that servitude ended, we were basically asked to leave. Well, we didn't leave, and then we brought more people with us. So as a result, in the current political climate we're in, people are very much offended by the nature of discourse. But if you knew your history, there'd be no offense, because we've had this language before, and we didn't leave then. And just the children of Israel, as they afflicted them, and they grew more. And the more they were afflicted, and they continued to grow. And that's what I see African Americans doing.
Wow. We were just talking with Dr. Lopez Matthews, and he was talking about how African Americans don't see their history as sexy enough. What are some things that we can tell or point to that shows that not only has African American history been effective in creating the culture that the world over benefits from, but it's something to be celebrated and not ashamed of?
that comes back to perspective. We almost have to take the lenses off that were put upon us and refocus our vision, like LASIK. You know, people who have LASIK, they say, well, I can take off my glasses now and I can see better. We have basically been put on with fraudulent glasses. So we now have to have some LASIKs. And whether we want to make that an acronym, loving African sisters in kind or siblings in kind, if we want to make that an acronym, I'm not even sure. But we really need to change our vision because we need to see our own worth, and not as it's been told to us, but as we experience it, without any apology. Just like they said during the 1920s, we're going to speak for ourselves without apology or consent. We will now declare for ourselves who and what we are. And that's what we need to do.
In the 1920s?
1920s, Langston Hughes with Fire, the magazine Fire. And that generation said, we're going to speak for ourselves.
So much is told within, because you know the mainstream, it spits out so many of these ill-fated attempts to make facts out of Black history, and a lot of Black people have appropriated and adopted some of these counterproductive statements and outright fallacies of history that basically Black people were destroyed after slavery. And Black slavery so damaged Black people that they couldn't do anything until the 1960s. That it was the Black Power movement that told them, hey, you're Black and you're proud.
That's a very good point you bring up, but once again, that was someone else controlling the narrative. If you look at the Afro-American newspaper that is actually a co-sponsor of the event today, you can see for 125 years they've been publishing Black stories in Black Lives Matter for 125 years. So we never, once again, were looking for any affirmation. But if you were in the Baltimore, Washington area, you might not have heard about the Afro. But then again, I was just told they had 13 outposts across the country, as far as like Oklahoma and various parts of the West. So once again, it might be generational. So maybe someone who's in their 70s or 80s members reading the Afro. Most of us under the age of 70 or 60 don't read the Afro. We don't subscribe to the Afro, but they're still publishing Black stories. So as a result, we need to broaden our horizons on who and what is authentic voice. But I was just talking to someone about history, and the way we think about history is names and dates.
Right.
History, as you very well know, sir, is about concepts and ideas. So we need to move from this whole idea of just simply names and dates in the month of February to more ideas and concepts. And that's what we need to start to broaden and redefine what is history. Once again, back to that corrective vision. If you look at the Holocaust, there's a whole movement now as they start to die off. They're rewriting European history, and the Holocaust survivors are much afraid of the fact that they might erase this happening.
Right.
Because they won't have a living witness. Well, our enslaved ancestors were no longer living witnesses after like 1940. Most of them had passed away. And then their children had started to pass away. So we lost the human link to the enslavement process, but we know what happened.
Right.
So as a result, we need to acknowledge that. So the same thing in the midst of the ugliness of the enslavement process, the success of being able to create family ties, cuisine, new languages, and become a new people. We were no longer just African. We became African American or Negro American. Most people are proud to be Negro American.
Right.
Because they couldn't go back to any part of Africa and identify with any tribal group. Because they were in fact American. I'm sure if you travel to Africa right now, you will see how much of an American you are.
Exactly.
During a rolling brownout when there's no ice cubes.
Right. So I was, as always at Howard, we learn about those individuals who shaped history, or those, like we say, those B players of history who shaped certain ideas. And I came across an article written by Sterling Brown, folklorist, poet, and he talked about being proud to be a Negro, that basically Paul Robeson was a Negro. He was a Negro. All these other individuals did outstanding things in the field of our culture, history, and science were Negroes. So understanding that when we look back on the past, we're constantly looking at it through the eyes of a present circumstance and not trying to see the answers for who they were and what they were trying to accomplish. And just because it's not here today, don't believe that, or it's not in your immediate vicinity, doesn't mean it's not a county away, or a state away, or maybe a region away, that we have to go beyond our insulated, self-imposed reality and search for the history that we want.
That's very important too, because I look at our incarnation. We were colored, small c, colored, large c, lowercase n, Negro, large n, African American, Black American. So all the different incarnations of how we've identified, either by self or by imposition, also make us sever that past. I'm not Negro. I'm an African American. Hyphen, no hyphen. Afro, right. Hyphen, no hyphen. So it gets to be such minutia. At the end of the day, all of humanity is African. The cradle of civilization which mankind walked on the earth came out of the eastern cradle of Africa. So at some point, mitochondrially DNA, we are all African. Now, the various phenotypes or our color scheme shades from the very opaque to the very ebon. And as a result of that scheme of color, those of us on the darker hue have been told by those on the lighter hue that we're less than. This just didn't start now. Winthrop Jordan talks about it, white over black. So as a result, you're looking at hundreds of years of a mindset being entrenched in a people's globally over hundreds of years. How do you change that? It's not going to happen in a generation.
Right.
But we have to start by acclamation and claiming and proclaiming who we are.
Right.
So as a result, having no shame being African, K or C, African, it doesn't matter. The point is that this history of these people who look like me, I claim that. And whatever they chose to call themselves, Negro, colored, Ethiopian, African, Anglo-African, they look like me. And I identify with those people. I claim that story, and that's who I proclaim.
Dr. Killmonger Jones, thank you for sitting down with us and giving us so much to think about.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, ma'am.